Have you ever looked in the mirror and wondered why your hair suddenly seems thinner, weaker, or simply not the way it used to be? What if I told you that hair loss is often not the real problem at all, but a warning sign your body has been trying to send you for months or even years? The truth is, losing hair is one of the most frustrating and misunderstood health concerns in medicine. Not because it is dangerous, but because despite decades of research, we still do not have one perfect long-term solution that works for everyone. And that is exactly why so many people feel confused, disappointed, or trapped in a cycle of expensive shampoos, miracle supplements, and treatments that promise everything and deliver very little. But here is the good news. Hair loss is rarely random. In most cases, your body leaves clues. And once you understand the real reason behind what is happening, treating hair loss becomes far more effective. Today, we are going to uncover the three major mechanisms behind hair loss: the hormonal causes, the inflammatory causes, and the nutritional causes. These can affect both men and women, although they often show up differently depending on your biology. More importantly, by the end of this video, you will have a much clearer idea of what may actually be causing your hair loss and what you can realistically do to improve it. Let us begin with the most common cause, especially in men: hormonal hair loss. If you are a man and you notice your hair starting to thin after your late teens or early adulthood, there is a very high chance hormones are involved, but not necessarily in the way most people think. You have probably heard people blame testosterone for hair loss, but the reality is more complicated. The hormone most strongly connected to male pattern hair loss is something called DHT, short for dihydrotestosterone. This hormone is considered one of the major drivers behind thinning hair, especially in adult men. Yet here is something surprising. Men who lose their hair do not always have dramatically higher DHT levels than men who keep a full head of hair. That completely changes how we should think about the problem. What scientists now believe is that many people who experience hair loss may simply have a stronger genetic sensitivity to DHT. In other words, the issue may not be how much hormone you have, but how sensitive your hair follicles are to it. In some people, DHT interacts with the follicles in a way that gradually weakens them, shrinks them, and eventually causes the hair to stop growing normally. And here is where things become important. Whether this theory explains everything or not, one fact remains very clear. Reducing DHT activity slows down hair loss. We see this repeatedly, and this hormonal pattern follows a very recognizable shape. You start noticing thinning near the temples, what many people call a receding hairline, or around the crown of the head. Meanwhile, the sides of the scalp often remain relatively untouched. This is what doctors call androgenic hair loss, or male pattern baldness. But there are three important things every man needs to understand about this process, because they completely change how you approach treatment. First, DHT does not appear out of nowhere. It actually comes from testosterone. Your body converts testosterone into DHT through an enzyme called 5-alpha reductase. Under certain conditions, whether because of genetics, metabolism, liver function, or hormonal imbalances, this conversion can become excessive. That means your body shifts toward producing more DHT relative to testosterone. And this is where many people accidentally make things worse. A lot of men assume boosting testosterone will automatically fix the issue. But if that increase happens artificially, especially through anabolic steroids or hormone abuse, hair loss often becomes dramatically worse. Why? Because you are suddenly flooding the body with more testosterone without changing the conversion process. That means there is now even more material available to turn into DHT, which can accelerate thinning and shedding. However, supporting healthy testosterone naturally is a completely different story. When you improve hormone balance through better metabolism, nutrition, sleep, stress control, and overall health, your body often handles this conversion more efficiently. In many cases, healthier testosterone metabolism may actually support healthier hair instead of worsening the problem. The second thing you need to understand is that reducing DHT activity matters, but how you do it matters just as much. many people immediately jump to medications. And while pharmaceutical options can be effective, they sometimes come with unwanted side effects, particularly related to sexual health and libido. That is why some people explore more natural approaches designed to slow down the conversion of testosterone into DHT. Certain natural compounds, including ingredients like saw palmetto, have gained attention for their ability to support a gentler reduction in DHT activity by influencing that same 5-alpha reductase pathway. The advantage is that these approaches may reduce the likelihood of stronger side effects, although they are often less powerful than prescription medications. And then comes the third thing, something many people completely overlook. If DHT is damaging hair follicles in the scalp, then logically, the safest place to target that problem may actually be the scalp itself. Instead of affecting hormone activity throughout the entire body, some approaches focus directly on the scalp in order to reduce local DHT effects, where hair follicles are being damaged most. This may help avoid broader unwanted effects elsewhere in the body. So if your hair loss follows that classic pattern, thinning temples, crown loss, a strong family history of baldness, there is a good chance hormones are involved. But before you rush into expensive treatments or panic over every strand of hair in the shower drain, there is something even more important you need to understand. Because what causes hormonal hair loss in women is often very different, far more complex, and surprisingly common. For many women, hair loss can feel deeply personal, even frightening. It often appears suddenly, quietly, almost without warning. One day the ponytail feels thinner, the shower drain fills faster than usual, the part line becomes wider. And unlike men, where the pattern is often easier to recognize, female hair loss can feel unpredictable and confusing. But behind the confusion, there is usually a biological explanation. One of the biggest discoveries in recent years is just how closely hormonal imbalances in women are linked to hair thinning. Conditions affecting reproductive hormones, especially those involving estrogen and testosterone balance, are becoming increasingly common, and hair loss is often one of the earliest warning signs. When hair loss has a hormonal origin in women, the first step is not buying another supplement or switching shampoos. It is understanding why the hormonal imbalance happened in the first place. Because unless the root problem is addressed, the hair itself is simply reacting to a signal coming from deeper inside the body. Take polycystic ovary syndrome, or PCOS, for example. It is one of the most common hormonal conditions associated with hair thinning in women. Thyroid imbalances are another major contributor, especially after the age of 30 or 40. These hormonal disruptions do far more than affect energy, mood, or menstrual cycles. They can directly influence the health of your hair follicles. And here is something that surprises many people. The same hormone involved in male hair loss, DHT, also plays an important role in women. Even though DHT is often considered a male hormone problem, women are not immune to its effects. In fact, many women experiencing hormonal imbalances begin to notice hair thinning in their early 30s or mid-30s, particularly when hormone regulation begins to shift. The reason comes down to balance. In healthy hormonal conditions, estrogen acts like a protective shield. It helps buffer the effects of testosterone and DHT on hair follicles. But when hormone balance changes, whether from PCOS, estrogen disruption, premenstrual hormone irregularities, or other endocrine conditions, testosterone levels may rise while estrogen levels decline. Suddenly, the body begins creating an environment much more similar to what happens in androgenic hair loss in men, and the signs often appear before the hair loss itself becomes severe. One of the earliest clues can be increased facial hair growth. If a woman notices more hair appearing on the chin, upper lip, or jawline while simultaneously experiencing thinning hair on the scalp, that combination can sometimes point toward elevated androgen activity. In simple terms, hormones may be shifting in a direction that favors testosterone and DHT effects. Normally, estrogen levels significantly outweigh testosterone in women, creating protection against these hormonal changes. But when that balance weakens, hair follicles become far more vulnerable. What makes this especially frustrating is that hormonal hair loss rarely happens in isolation. The body is interconnected, and one imbalance often creates another. For example, many women with hormone-related hair loss also experience menstrual irregularities. Heavy bleeding or cycle disruptions can gradually lower iron stores in the body, especially ferritin, which is one of the most important nutrients for healthy hair growth. So now the body's dealing with two problems at once: hormonal imbalance and nutritional deficiency. And this is exactly why hair loss can be so difficult to solve. Most people only focus on one variable. They try a vitamin without checking hormones, or they address hormones while ignoring nutrient deficiencies, or they buy cosmetic products hoping to reverse a problem that is actually happening internally. But hair loss is often multifactorial, multiple causes working together quietly over time. Now let us talk about another hormonal cause that is becoming increasingly common: thyroid dysfunction. If your thyroid is not functioning properly, your hair may be one of the first places you notice changes. The thyroid acts like the body's metabolic control center, influencing energy production, temperature regulation, metabolism, and yes, hair growth. Hair loss linked to thyroid dysfunction often has a different pattern. Instead of thinning mostly around the temples or crown, many people notice widening through the middle part of the scalp. Hair may become dry, brittle, weaker, and growth slows dramatically. And once again, thyroid-related hair loss often overlaps with nutritional deficiencies, especially iron and ferritin depletion. The body is under stress, metabolism slows, nutrients are not being utilized properly, and hair follicles begin suffering the consequences. This brings us to something people consistently underestimate: nutritional hair loss. Most people understand that poor nutrition affects energy levels or body weight, but very few realize just how dramatically nutrition affects the quality, thickness, and survival of hair itself. The reason is surprisingly logical. Your body is constantly making decisions about survival. Nutrients are limited resources, and when resources are limited, your body prioritizes what matters most. Hair, unfortunately, is not at the top of that priority list. Your brain, heart, immune system, hormones, and organs always come first. So when nutrient intake becomes insufficient, whether through restrictive dieting, long-term poor eating habits, digestive issues, or nutrient absorption problems, your body begins redirecting resources away from less essential functions. Hair growth becomes one of the first things sacrificed, and there is another reason nutrition matters so much. Hair-producing cells are among the fastest growing cells in the human body. In fact, they divide incredibly rapidly, second only to certain blood-forming cells inside your bone marrow. That means healthy hair requires a constant supply of nutrients to maintain normal growth. The faster a tissue grows, the more nutrients it consumes. So even small deficiencies, especially when sustained for months or years, can slowly weaken hair quality. At first, the changes are subtle. Maybe your hair no longer grows as quickly as it used to. Maybe you notice fewer haircuts are needed. Maybe the texture changes, becoming thinner, weaker, less dense. Then, eventually, shedding becomes more obvious. Unlike hormonal hair loss, nutritional hair loss usually does not follow a very specific pattern. Instead, it tends to happen diffusely across the entire scalp. Everything looks generally thinner rather than concentrated in one area. And because it happens gradually and globally, people often ignore it until it becomes impossible to overlook. What is making this issue even more common today is the growing popularity of highly restrictive diets, whether it is aggressive calorie restriction, extreme food elimination, poorly planned vegan diets, or certain trendy eating patterns. Many people unknowingly create nutrient deficiencies that quietly damage hair health over time. And here's something important to understand. Even mild nutritional deficiencies can worsen hormonal or inflammatory hair loss. These mechanisms do not work independently. They often amplify each other. So how do you know when nutrition might be the hidden problem? There are certain clues. If your hair grows much slower than it used to, if you have followed restrictive diets for years, if you avoid many animal-based foods without careful nutritional planning, or if you notice thinning across your entire scalp instead of a specific pattern, nutrition deserves serious attention. But the real question becomes this: which nutrients actually matter most for healthy hair, and which popular supplements are mostly hype? Because this is where many people waste years chasing the wrong solutions. If you've ever stood in a supplement aisle staring at dozens of products promising thicker, fuller, healthier hair, you are not alone. Biotin, collagen, miracle capsules, hair gummies, exotic oils, expensive formulas that seem almost too good to ignore. But here's what most people never hear. The best supplement for hair loss depends entirely on why your hair is falling out in the first place. Because if you are treating the wrong cause, even the most expensive product in the world will disappoint you. Let us start with one of the most important nutrients in hair health, iron, and more specifically, ferritin. Ferritin is essentially your body's iron storage system. And when ferritin levels begin dropping, hair follicles often suffer long before obvious symptoms of iron deficiency appear. This becomes especially important for women, particularly those experiencing hormonal imbalances, heavy menstrual cycles, or irregular bleeding. When menstrual bleeding becomes excessive, iron stores can quietly decline month after month, eventually reaching a point where hair growth begins slowing down and shedding increases. But men are not immune to this problem either. Even though ferritin deficiency is more commonly discussed in women, low iron stores can absolutely contribute to hair thinning in men as well. And what makes this so tricky is that many people assume everything is fine simply because their blood work says they are within normal range. This is where confusion often begins. Laboratory reference ranges and optimal health ranges are not always the same thing. You can technically fall inside a laboratory's acceptable range and still have nutrient levels that are too low to properly support healthy hair growth. Hair follicles are demanding. They need resources constantly. And when nutrients become limited, hair production is one of the first things your body begins scaling back. Ferritin matters because it directly supports follicle function. If your levels are insufficient, hair can become weaker, thinner, and more prone to shedding. And this problem becomes far more likely if your diet is highly restrictive or lacks adequate nutrient density. For example, diets with little or no animal-based food can sometimes increase the risk of iron deficiency if not planned carefully. This does not mean such diets are impossible to do well, but it does mean they require greater attention to nutritional balance. And iron is only part of the story. Folate and vitamin B12 also play important supporting roles, especially because deficiencies in these nutrients often overlap with iron-related problems. These vitamins contribute to healthy cell division and tissue repair, both of which are essential for maintaining strong, healthy hair growth. Then there is vitamin D, one of the most misunderstood nutrients in medicine. Most people think of vitamin D as something related only to bones or sunlight, but the reality is far more interesting. Vitamin D behaves much more like a hormone than a traditional vitamin. It influences how your immune system responds, how inflammation is regulated, and even how certain tissues repair themselves. That becomes incredibly important when we talk about hair loss, because hair growth is not only influenced by hormones and nutrition, it is deeply affected by your immune system. If inflammation is active, hair follicles often struggle to function normally. In some cases, the immune system becomes overly reactive, creating an environment where normal hair growth becomes disrupted. This is one reason vitamin D deficiency is frequently associated with certain forms of hair thinning. You may have heard vitamin D discussed in relation to immune health, infections, or recovery during illness. That is because it helps regulate how strongly the immune system responds. And when it comes to hair, this balance matters more than most people realize. There is another condition worth mentioning here called telogen effluvium. The name sounds complicated, but the concept is actually very simple. This type of hair loss often happens after intense stress. Maybe it was emotional trauma, a major illness, surgery, a severe infection, months of chronic anxiety. Even large-scale stressful events that affected millions of people globally have triggered increased shedding in some individuals. What happens is fascinating. Under significant stress, your body produces more cortisol, often called the stress hormone. This shift can disrupt the normal hair growth cycle, pushing more hairs into a resting phase before they suddenly begin shedding weeks or months later. And because stress also influences inflammation and immune function, hair loss often becomes worse if nutritional deficiencies are already present. This is why supporting immune balance matters. Vitamin D plays a role here. Omega-3 fatty acids also become extremely important because they help regulate inflammatory responses throughout the body. Now let us talk about biotin, probably the most famous hair vitamin in the world. Almost every hair supplement seems to contain it. And yes, biotin does matter. It supports healthy hair structure and metabolism. Certain amino acids, such as cysteine, also contribute to the proteins needed for healthy hair formation. But here is something many supplement companies do not advertise. Deficiencies in biotin are actually relatively uncommon. In other words, while biotin supports hair health, it is often not the missing piece causing your hair loss. The same applies to several trendy ingredients commonly marketed for thicker hair. They may support healthy growth, but if the underlying cause is hormonal imbalance, chronic inflammation, thyroid dysfunction, or iron deficiency, the impact will often be limited. Think of it this way. If your house has a damaged foundation, repainting the walls will not solve the real problem. That does not mean these nutrients are useless. It simply means they are supportive, not magical. For example, minerals like silica may contribute to stronger hair structure. Biotin can still support healthy growth. Amino acids can provide building blocks, but none of these are likely to dramatically change your results if the real issue remains untreated underneath. This is exactly why some people spend years trying supplement after supplement without seeing meaningful improvement. They are targeting symptoms instead of mechanisms. And now we arrive at the third major cause of hair loss, the one many people overlook completely: inflammation. Because sometimes the problem is not hormones, sometimes it is not nutrition either. Sometimes your scalp itself is under attack, and the signs can be easier to spot than you think. Does your scalp itch frequently? Do you struggle with dandruff, flaking, irritation, redness, or greasy inflammation that comes and goes? Have certain hair products suddenly started causing discomfort? These may be clues that inflammation is playing a much bigger role than you realize. And the more inflammation affecting the scalp, the greater the potential damage to hair follicles over time. But inflammation is not always obvious. Sometimes it comes from an imbalance in microorganisms naturally living on your scalp. In other cases, the immune system becomes overly reactive, and occasionally inflammation develops as part of broader skin conditions. The question is, how do you actually recognize inflammatory hair loss? And more importantly, how do you calm it down before it starts affecting long-term growth? Because this is where many people finally discover the missing piece they never considered. One of the easiest ways to recognize inflammation-related hair loss is by paying attention to your scalp. Your scalp often gives warnings long before significant shedding begins. The problem is that most people ignore those signals or mistake them for something minor. For example, does your scalp itch on and off? Do you notice dandruff that keeps coming back no matter what shampoo you try? Maybe you experience oily patches, irritation, redness, flaking, or sensitivity after applying certain hair products. If any of this sounds familiar, there's a good chance inflammation may be involved. And here is something important to understand. Inflammation itself is not always the enemy. Your immune system uses inflammation as a protective response. The problem happens when that response becomes excessive, chronic, or poorly regulated. When inflammation remains active for too long, hair follicles begin paying the price. The more inflammation affecting the scalp, the greater the stress placed on hair-producing follicles. Over time, this can disrupt growth cycles, weaken strands, and increase shedding. In many cases, inflammation develops because the balance of microorganisms living naturally on the scalp changes. Most people are surprised to learn that your scalp has its own ecosystem made up of bacteria, fungi, and microscopic organisms that normally coexist without causing problems. But when that balance becomes disrupted, irritation can begin. Sometimes certain fungi grow excessively. In other situations, bacteria shift out of balance. There are even microscopic organisms naturally present on human skin that feed on oils produced by the scalp. Under the wrong conditions, these microorganisms can contribute to irritation and inflammatory reactions. This imbalance may show up as dandruff, seborrheic dermatitis, persistent itchiness, greasy flaking, or recurring irritation. However, not all inflammation-related scalp problems automatically lead to hair loss. Conditions like psoriasis, for example, may involve scalp inflammation but do not always result in significant thinning. That is why context matters. The real question becomes, how do you know whether inflammation is contributing to your hair loss? One clue is inconsistency. Symptoms that flare up, improve temporarily, and then return often suggest inflammatory activity. Another clue is visible scalp discomfort, itching, redness, or chronic dandruff. And here is something many people miss. Poor nutrition can quietly worsen inflammation too. When nutrient levels become suboptimal, your immune system becomes less efficient at regulating itself. The body becomes more reactive, healing slows down, and inflammation becomes harder to control.